Hey, everybody. How are you? You're like, where's Kravitz? Here I am. Hi. Happy Friday, 420 Live. Jeff Kravitz signing in. Ready for another adventure here on the World Wide Web. We've had a hell of a week this week on the internet, talking to so many different people. We had a mixed grab bag on Monday. Tuesday, we were talking to our friend Oliver Wood. What a great conversation with Oliver. What a talent. Wednesday, we had the amazing Billy Ayuso in from the Big Easy performing a couple songs for us. Thursday, yesterday, Scary Pool Party, Alejandro Aranda. What an interview. What a talent. And I will be shooting his show on Sunday. It'll be the first concert that I've photographed since I can't even remember. I can remember my last job was the HBO, the Westworld premiere, but I cannot remember my last, my last dive into a show at a venue. This is going to be different because I'm going to be in there with the camera crew, and that's about it, and probably the management. Everybody else is going to be tuning in online. That's the new way we're consuming music, but not if you're in Florida, because guess what? The governor today cured COVID. Florida has figured it out. Yes, you heard it here first. Florida has a cure. Everything is open back up. You can do whatever you want. You could be with as many people as you want. But if you want my suggestion, it would be stay the hell away from Florida and Texas and everywhere else. I just read an article before I hit the stage today that New York City might be going further into lockdown. I mean, this is not going away fast, folks. And we have to be really diligent and careful out there. I know there's a lot of complaining all over the world. In Israel, they're complaining about going back into lockdown. Everywhere is complaining again. But meanwhile, yesterday's article in Rolling Stone about how concerts are coming back. And in some places in America, we're in an interesting paradigm. I'm in no hurry to go anywhere where I'm going to put myself in danger, and I think everybody has to think for themselves, because obviously the people in charge are not giving us the direction and advice that our country needs. They don't know how to lead. And that's one of the reasons that we have the guests that we do today. Andy Bernstein has been on the show before. He started headcount.org with our good friend Mark Brownstein, who's also been on the show before and told us the origins and how it's all started. Headcount has had to redo the way that they reach out to the people. They've spent their career before COVID pretty much hand in hand, seeing people at shows, signing people up, talking to people, finding out if they're registered, helping them registered, or making sure they're confirming you're registered. And now they're in the digital world, in the digital age, and reaching out through an incredible medium. And yesterday they hit a goal of 200,000, signing up 200,000 people to vote, registering 200,000 votes. And it's stuff like what Headcount's doing, what our friend Mike Bloomberg, who's spending $100 million down there in Florida to pay the fines of 30,000 convicts or felons that don't have the money that they need to pay so they can vote. These are people that I believe there are people that are out of jail that committed felonies that have to pay. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but I'll take 30,000 votes so there's no hanging chads. But our fearless leader, what do they call them? And our supreme leader. Yeah, that's it. Our supreme leader. It's only going to be a fair election if I decide it's fair. Yes, the emperor wears no clothes, folks. And I believe that all of America, or at least 65% of America, has their eyes open. And the 35% is holding on tight. They're militarizing, creating militias, intimidating us where we vote already in Virginia, intimidating people where they vote. But, there's nothing more intimidating than the vote. And that's what people are afraid of. They're afraid that we're going to vote. What kind of country is this? Weren't we built on this democracy? Andy Bernstein, what kind of country is this?
I don't know, man. It's the kind of country where they let Jeff Kravitz have his own highly successful internet show. All is lost.
All is lost. Welcome, Andy. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, my man.
So you've been a busy guy because you're now on the computer all day, where normally you would be traveling around the country from event to event and marshaling your troops. How is leading by digital going?
I'll tell you, like, it's worked out really well. We've had our best year ever. We set the goal of registering 200,000 voters like 2 years ago, and it wasn't easy by any means, but we hit our goal on September 24th, and we still have another solid 3 weeks to go in most places to register voters. So we're going to blow away our goals. And it's funny, like when the pandemic hit, it was really like we watched like everything disappear, just like everyone in the music world. Like all these big like partnerships we'd set up and all these tours, we were going to be embedded on the Green Day Stadium tour and Harry Styles, some of the biggest arena, amphitheater, stadium stuff. And it just all disappeared pretty much overnight. And for like a couple months, it was like really slow. Like we literally registered less than 1,000 people in the month of April. And I think that around the time of George Floyd's murder, I know that there was just a political awakening that happened in the country. The focus shifted from the pandemic to just how fucked up everything was. And we started seeing artists, we started hearing from artists, hearing from partners, started seeing the registrations come in on our website. And we've always done a fair amount of online voter registration. It just wasn't really what we were known for. And what was really incredible was people started calling us with digital ideas. We're working with YouTubers. We're working with Spotify and SoundCloud. And we did a big partnership with Global Citizen. That's a multi-year partnership. So it ended up strangely being a real turning point for the organization. We've been doing this for 16 years, and we've grown a lot. We're over 20 employees now. But personally, I was sort of having a moment this year where I was like, am I just going to do the same thing forever? Like, I don't want to do that. I wanted to see the organization take a turn. I didn't know what the turn was. And now I feel like we're primed for the future to have even more impact. Hopefully 4 years from now, we'll be talking about a number that's double what we did this year. Because I feel like it took us a long time to find that, that digital footing, which is what drives the world right now. So we've actually had a really good experience, and we're fueled by the election that's clearly the most important election of our lives. And we say that every 4 years, but who are we kidding? Like this is a battle for the soul of the country, and I'm very respectful of both sides because I think that the sides have a tendency to not listen to each other and not understand each other, and that's not good for our country. So regardless of what my own politics might be, I try to really hear why people feel differently. But no matter what your view is, you can't deny that this is a hard turn one way or the other. And the vote, hopefully, and I say hopefully because there's so many efforts to suppress the vote, but this is the time where our country decides what country we want to be.
Do you remember an election where the opponent was trying to keep people from voting in America?
Well, I think that that's actually a very common thing in American history. And, we have a long history of people using the vote to, fortify power structures. And that means keeping people out. And that's why we had a Civil Rights Act and a Voting Rights Act and all of these things. And, I watched the movie Selma the other day, and I'd never seen it. And I really recommend it because it's just a simple story in the end about how Martin Luther King went to Lyndon B. Johnson and said, we need voting rights. And LBJ said, no. He said, give me more time. And MLK said, we're not going to give you any time. And the strategy and the fight and the courage. And it really is it's just worth watching because it grounds you in that, no, this isn't new. This isn't new at all. This has been going on for hundreds of years. But what is really new is like the politicization of mail-in voting is one of the scariest things. And if there's one thing that I can say to anybody is cut through the political hype and hear this. There are risks to voting by mail for your vote not being counted. And this is real. And there are a lot of mail-in ballots get rejected, and they get rejected for a lot of different reasons because they arrive late, because the signature doesn't match, because they're not filled out correctly. And what's happening now is polls say Democrats are 4 times more likely to vote by mail than Republicans. And this is an entirely new phenomenon based on the politicization of mail-in voting. Well, if a certain percentage of mail-in ballots are rejected, and it's very heavily on one side or another, and there's a very large number of mail-in ballots, we'll do the math. It's going to take any close elections, and it's going to mean that the will of the people is not being what are going to be the results. So if you're going to vote by mail, do it really carefully. Do it now. Don't wait till the end when the post office can mess you up. Fill it out very carefully. Maybe drop it off in person so you're not leaving anything to the post office. Make sure your signature matches what's on file. And if you don't know, if you didn't register through the DMV, you're not going to know. So you got to be really careful. And I think what's scary is that people are thinking that voting by mail is a great act of defiance. It's like, oh, Trump is against voting by mail, so I'm going to go vote by mail. Well, what Trump has basically said in the last couple of days is they're going to do everything they can to not count mail-in ballots. They're going to challenge mail-in ballots left and right. And so if you want your vote to count, don't get caught up in the politics. You're not saying screw you to Donald Trump by voting by mail. You're potentially saying screw you to yourself, and your ballot has a chance of not being counted. And if you do vote by mail, just do it very carefully. Have somebody look at it, make sure you got everything right. Every state is different. There's there's a signature on the outside of the envelope. There's all these different things. And if you're ADD like me, you can get that. I'm somebody who can screw that up. I'm very capable.
But does Headcount show you on each state ballot where you need to make sure you signed and stuff like that if you're going to mail it in? I mean, is that instructions that are easily to find on the internet? Or you just need to read your ballot?
Yeah, it's on headcount.org, and we've been doing a ton of research, and we're updating it. We're actually doing a big update on Monday of really every state. You know, some state requires postage, some states do not. And honestly, we're constantly adding. We're learning new things, and the complexity of it. Like we just like Alabama now. Alabama is supposedly a state that doesn't allow early voting, but there's one like specific way that you can do it, and this now appears on our website. So yeah, I do encourage people to check out headcount.org. We have an amazing in-house person named Tappan Vickery, who's a big fish fan and part of our extended community. And Tappan, over the years with Headcount, has become one of the leading experts in voting information. And she just knows more than almost anybody alive. She's kind of our secret weapon. And so we're constantly updating the website. We're doing peer-to-peer texting. We're going to send 3 million texts between now and the election. And this is fun. We actually had Bob Weir join us for a texting session this week. And the session is all deadheads texting other deadheads, because we have about 30,000 people.
Oh, I have a bunch of friends who got those texts.
Yeah. So Bobby was actually in the texting session, and we did it with Ariana Grande fans. We're doing one with Dave fans and Fish fans, because we're using the lists we have. So we're just doing everything we can. We're throwing everything at this election. We're also launched a website that's about talking to friends who don't vote, because we all have friends who don't vote. So we have a site, headcount.org, talk about voting. And it's like talking tips when you're in an uncomfortable conversation with someone who doesn't vote. Here are like non-threatening, non-asshole things you can say that might make somebody feel why you vote. And it's just one of many things that we're trying to do here. I want to wake up on November 4th and know that I did everything I possibly could to get as many people to vote. We're just doing everything we can, and that's what we see what he's doing on his end. Let me ask you this: I was walking around downtown Santa Monica the other day, and I saw something I never saw before, and that's like a 2 foot by 2 foot, 3.5 foot high box that was cemented to the ground that said, "Drop your ballot off here." Yeah, and that's, through all of this horror of the pandemic, there are actually real improvements to voting systems that are happening. And full mail-in voting was already in 5 states, including Utah, which is one of the reddest states. So it was not a red-blue thing. It was really just a improved voting methods thing. And if you're a Colorado resident, you've been doing this for years. Washington and Oregon as well. Hawaii became a vote-by-mail state. And now you've got 5 more states that are doing it for the pandemic. And the drop-off boxes are a key part of this, because the post office is not reliable right now. And
so
that's
what's
just the
different if
reality.
you drop off your ballot? Because like last time I went to vote in Los Angeles, I pulled up, the line was around the block, and I still had my mail-in ballot. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to drop this off. And I saw that I could drop it off at the library, and there's a drop-off box. Is your ballot definitely going to be, is it more likely to be counted in if you drop it off than it is if it's mailed in?
Well, yeah, because if the post office is slow and it arrives too late, then it won't get counted. So the drop off takes one big variable out of the equation, which it got there. Now, you still have to have filled it out correctly. But the post office stuff, one of the reasons it's really confusing is because states vary in whether it's a postmark or an arrive by. And this is info that's on our website. And I couldn't tell you what California is. I couldn't even tell you what my home state is.
I believe it's a postmark, but you're right. It's one or the other, and you want to get it in there early, I guess, is what the main thing is.
Right. And here's what could very well happen. So if it's a postmark, well, if the post office is slow and it takes a week and you have a close election, well, that there are going to be sides calling for stopping and cutting off counting the ballots. Like, we can't wait forever is what people are going to say. Now, like Virginia just announced that it's 3 days. So it's postmarked, but it has to arrive in 3 days. But that's a little misleading because mail is often taking a week right now. So the post office has recommended you mail it at least 7 days in advance. Headcount, we're recommending 14 days in advance because nobody wants to leave this to chance. And it's a very, very real, very, very scary problem because of the politicization. If this was sort of 50-50 and it was half one side or half the other, it sucks that mail-in ballots are getting rejected, as they have for many years. This is not a new thing, but there aren't clear examples of it turning elections, although there actually are. People just didn't realize that it happened. But in this particular election, because it's so politicized about mail-in voting and because Democrats are now 4 times more likely to vote by mail, if a large number of mail-in ballots are rejected, that could be the thing that determines the outcome of the election. And no matter who you support, think about how awful that would be. Can you imagine the election, the direction of the free world being decided based on like mailing logistics and pieces of paper? And you know what? That happened. That happened in 2000. Hanging chads, remember?
Yeah, I talked about it in my intro, the hanging chad. All right, Andy, let me. I just, before I bring Jen in, I have one more thing I want to talk about with you, and that is the balloting places, the reduction in the amount of places there are to vote. How different states like Georgia are like, oh no voting here, no voting there. But then we have someone like the NBA coming in and saying, we're going to open up all our arenas and people are going to be able to come down and vote at the Staples Center or wherever your arena is in your town. How does it work, first of all, in closing them, and how easy is it to create alternate ballot places?
Well, got to give a lot of credit to the sports leagues and LeBron's group that was really instrumental in this. And Live Nation, who we're working with on a project, they're doing a lot of their venues are becoming polling places. And I think it varies by county. It's a matter of the kind of venue owner getting connected with the county and working it out. And there's a big variation in how it's being done. But, we're seeing in the 16 years I've been doing this by far is the most engaged corporate America has been, and people of power and brands and certainly sports teams. This is a brand new thing in terms of the sports leagues really engaging around this. And it's great. I mean, because we live in a country, better or for worse, where the power is held by sports teams owners and media companies and technology companies. And I've been advocating this for many years. Like, groups like Headcount can only get so much done. The way we really get it done is when we work with someone like a Spotify or, and you have pro sports leagues working with LeBron's group and other organizations.
But how do they get all those? How do they get all the voting machines? So if they're closing all these places, can the NBA say, okay, we need an extra 1,000 voting machines on the floor of Staples, and they just come out of thin air? I'm having a hard time wrapping myself about how different places are trying to scale it down. And then other people are like, no, we're going to ramp this up.
Well,
I don't understand how that works.
Thing. You know, Zuckerberg gave $250 million to fund what the government wasn't funding. Like the CARES Act had $400 million for elections. The recommendation from the Brennan Center was $2 billion, and then they upped it to $4 billion. So it's basically funded at the 10th of the level they felt it was needed for safe and fair elections. And Zuckerberg threw in $250 million to help out. I'm not an expert on like setting up voting machines and things like that. Like, ask me about festivals. I know a lot about festivals.
I was just wondering about the scalability for that and how easy it is and what the issues are with them closing these places down to vote. Because last time we saw the lines and the lines were really long, and it was, you know, people waited 13 hours to vote. I mean, that's insane. And then if you see what happened in Virginia, when they opened up, I'm sure you saw, everybody saw the lines going, thousands of people in line to wait to vote because they want to vote on the first day voting is up. This shows a lot of interest in the election, and that's really portends well for the Democrats, correct?
Well, I think that, you know, passionate people who can't wait to vote, there's a segment. I don't know if it bodes well for the Democrats because the surveys show that Trump voters are much more passionate than Democratic voters, than Biden voters. So if that's a sign of passion, I mean, I think we know that there is a passion deficit on the Biden ticket. But I think that, you know, what we're seeing here, I just want to say something about the lines. I mean, there's a few really fucked up things in America when it comes to voting. And the one most obvious one is the lines. And you know that black voters are waiting on much longer lines than white voters. And that is a proven fact by like 3-1 or something like that. And you'd think that this is just easy math. They know from past history how many people are likely to vote within a few percentage points. And how could you have more voting machines per voter in one place than another? That's just wrong. And that's voter suppression in its purest form. The other big form of voter suppression is people getting purged from the voter rolls.
And that happened to me. I went on Headcount the other day. Kiki told me that Dad, your friend got purged. You should check. And I went on and checked, and I was purged. I had to re-register the other night. And I went for the Lenny Kravitz Global Citizens package, by the way.
Oh, very good. Well done. Very well done. And what Jeff is referencing is we have this great partnership with Global Citizen where you can win experiences and sign things just for checking your registration status. And we got Bobby and Dave Matthews in it, but it's also like Taylor Swift and Billie Eilish and just like every kind of artist, influencers, things like that. And that was our big pivot with the digital. That was the first thing we rolled out, was doing these contests where you check your registration status and you can win something. The first ones we did was with Sophie Tucker, who's an awesome act that's been very supportive of Headcount. And then we did one with Dave Matthews. We did one with Camila Cabello. And when we started working with Global Citizen, that was the idea we suggested that really fit their branded model. And they brought in, I mean, they're awesome. They've been incredible partners. And they brought in Taylor Swift, and they brought in, honestly, a lot of pop acts that aren't my world at all. DJ Khaled, like some that I know and some that I don't know because, you know, I've been hanging out with guys like you for the last 20 years.
And that's your problem. And people like Jen Glickman, I want to bring Jen in because she's sitting in there waiting. Talk a little bit about Cannabis Voter and introduce Jen for us.
Sure. So something that not a lot of people know is Headcount has a Cannabis Voter Project. Everybody's got a cannabis side hustle, and Headcount does as well. We recognized a few years ago that cannabis was an issue that could bring non-voters out to the polls, that there are people who are fed up with politics, think it doesn't apply to them, but when you put cannabis on the ballot, that's a real motivating factor. And the other thing we recognize is that there are a lot of people who are voting but aren't well informed about where their elected officials stand on cannabis. And I was one of those people for sure. I had no idea where my congressman stood on cannabis or what was happening in my home state. So we launched something called cannabisvoter.info. A guy named Sam D'Arcangelo has been running the project from day one. And we've registered thousands and thousands of cannabis voters. We work with the dispensaries. We work with the cannabis brands. And it's the website, cannabisvoter.info, has the voting record of every federal elected official on cannabis on like 7 different areas. So if people are interested in this, I encourage them to check it out. I learned that my congressman is one of the most anti-cannabis Democrats in the entire party. And I didn't know that. And I use it now anytime there's an opportunity to interact with my congressman. I let him know how I feel about that issue. And I actually voted against him. And personally, I voted against him in the primary just because of that issue. And I use the information that I don't normally say who I vote for, but in this case, I think it's relevant that that was information that I wanted to use to make my vote. And cannabisvoter.info that we created does that. So it's something not a lot of people know we've been doing. We've been doing it for a little while, and we always love to spread the word about it because we think it's a really valuable resource.
All right. Well, let's bring in Jen Glickman from CannaCraft. Hello, Jen.
Hey, everybody. How's it going? Thanks.
Good. How are you?
Good.
Can you sum up what the both nominees' cannabis platform is?
Oh, gosh, that's a really difficult one. The truth is that right now, Biden is talking about decriminalization. He's not moving as quickly as we want him to be. And my opinion is that, Trump is nowhere on cannabis. My personal biggest fear is that Trump would actually move on cannabis up to, coming up to this election. But they're not. Unfortunately, the Democrats did not accept cannabis as a party platform, moving into this, which is something that we really wanted to see. But the truth is that the Cannabis Voter Project is really about the voters getting that information and just getting them to fill out their ballots and go to the polls. Because for so long, I think that the cannabis voter has been a disenfranchised voter. The government wasn't there for them, right? If anything, they were hiding. Why would I want to tell you where I live if I have to be illegally growing my medicine somewhere, right? And so that as we move to legalization within the states, that one of those things is that in getting voters back in, we need to know more than just, are you voting to legalize cannabis? How are we legalizing cannabis? Where are we legalizing? How will it affect existing laws? How did Prop 64, affect Prop 215? And, here in California, what's happening right now in Michigan with people sitting behind bars, but there's a full rec law. Could we have written into that law the release of nonviolent cannabis offenders?
Well, that's you're talking Last Prisoner Project right there, correct?
Of course, absolutely. But again, it's not, we're a huge supporter of LPP as well, but just that in general, we should all be thinking about this and being really aware of what's in these laws, who are our people. If you are in a state that doesn't have a cannabis law that's on a ballot right now, your reps are still going to be representing you on a federal level when it comes to this conversation about legalization.
Yeah, well, it's a way. Cannabis was an easy way to put people in jail. And, once they privatized the prisons to have the workforce that they needed to have to do all the privatized jobs are doing. It's just a giant snake eating its tail. And unfortunately, a lot of people smoke cannabis. It was an easy way to lock people up over the years.
Absolutely. And of course, who those people are, we all know that is, absolutely affecting the BIPOC community way more than white cannabis users. And that also needs to stop. And cannabis really touches on so many of the issues that have always been really important issues that are also getting a light shined on them now. It's a social justice issue. It's a medical issue. It's an addiction issue of getting off of opiates and prescription drugs. It's an agricultural issue. It is how we are filling our coffers in our states right now during COVID, right? Becoming essential and what that really meant for cannabis, for access to medicine, for, what those taxes are representing and what we're able to do for them during the shutdown.
Yeah, it's been incredible. Cannabis as essential. Is there anywhere where that's legal that hasn't been deemed even recreational or medical, where it hasn't been deemed essential? Or
Massachusetts lagged, but they got there.
They finally did it.
Yeah.
Well, it's essential in all of our lives. I know that for sure. What ideally would you like to see Biden add to the platform?
Obviously I want full legalization, and, descheduling down to 2 is really going to only open it up for the pharmaceuticals. Today, the big news in terms of legalization or just in cannabis in general was for the briefest of moment. It looked like there was going to be a vote on the floor about being able to research and studies using cannabis out of dispensaries, not just government grown cannabis, which is typically everybody looks at it and, none of us would smoke the weed that they're testing, right?
Wait, G13 was supposed to be, that was the government strain, right?
Right. So the idea that, that they were then going to actually be testing the medicine that you can go and purchase in your store, but also be opening that up to non-governmental researcher. And it went up and everybody got very excited. And within a couple hours, it came down. And it was, whoops, that was a mistake.
But at least you could see they're thinking about it and it's bubbling up, right?
But and that's why it's so important that where your rep that you're voting for stands on legalization, not just if there's a state law, but where they stand in general, because they're going to be representing us on these issues on a federal level.
How many people are we pulling from? How many cannabis smokers are there in the United States right now? Do you know off the top of your head?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I believe it's up in the 80, that more than 80% of Americans at this point are saying that they're full for additional legalization measures.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you're going to get much pushback.
Right. The other thing about it is that it's a bipartisan issue. So the truth is that's also, when Andy's talking about like, where can we find those commonalities? I feel like when I was growing up, there were, my dad was a Democrat who worked for a Republican governor, and that was normative. And you disagreed about the things that you disagreed on, but you also worked together and the things that you did agree on, those commonalities, and we got things done. And in this day and age, I'm just not going to work with you if I disagree with you. Period. It is fascinating to watch people be able to come together over the issue of cannabis.
Yeah.
Because the reality is we don't want our relatives in pain. We don't want our relatives on opiates. We don't want our friends on that. And it's a really almost intimate way to enter into the political arena when you realize how passionate and how cannabis affects can be helpful to all of us in our daily lives.
Yeah. I mean, if you read The Emperor Wears No Clothes, Jack Herrera's book, he basically lays it down. Textiles, medicine, food, all the different areas. They were printing paper with old growth forests, and they didn't want to use cannabis because cannabis is renewable, and they invested in old growth forests. And it's just, they did everything wrong they could possibly do and continue to do everything wrong they could possibly do.
Anything plastic can be made out of hemp.
Is that true? Is that true?
Absolutely. It is absolutely true. And with an investment in a hemp infrastructure, really what we could be building our houses out of hemp. And so to be sitting here in a world literally on fire, on this coast, and kind of knowing, I think Newsom's doing great things with where he's coming out with electric cars and trying to get at it. But here we are, we're still producing single-use plastic when we could be doing that out of hemp.
Wow. Well, that would be a huge change. I just didn't know chemically that you could do that with hemp, because when I talked to my friends, because I had the people on from the Plastics Pollution Coalition, and they were talking about, I asked them if you could do it out of hemp, and they were like, yeah. But I know that one of the things that William Randolph Hearst invested in also, besides old growth forests, was DuPont, and DuPont was responsible for giving us plastic. And that's one of the reasons we have a world full of plastics. And one of the other one was medicine. You're right there, Andy?
It's you're mentioning Jack Herrera's book, The Emperor Has No Clothes. I got a copy of that in like the early 90s, very early 90s. And it was, I think, old then. And for anybody who hasn't read it, I'm thinking back to it. It basically was, the theme was hemp can save the planet. And it basically talked about everything you just said about kind of the really conspiracy to keep hemp out. But what I'm thinking about is how that was, 20 years before legalization really happened. More than that, there was like one voice talking about, the unjust sort of limitations put on society for something that could be positive. And it's really inspiring. It's just like, at a time there were a few people saying it, or one author, and it was like an underground book that you could get at head shops and stuff like that. And now, we live in a country where, at least medical is legal in most places. And it just, I don't know, it just sort of brings me back. I think about getting that book when I was 19 years old and living in Berkeley. And like just that feeling of change can happen. It sometimes takes a long, long time.
It takes a long time. I mean, Jack was pulling for this stuff. That book was from the 70s. He wrote that book in the 70s. And for him to be that forward thinking back then, and for it to take 50 years from the time that book came out to the reality where we are, where he was right in everything he wrote in that book. And when I have conversations with my friends, if you think about the things he talks about, fuel. Okay, where are we with fuel right now? Where are we with pollution? Opiates, ruining our world. Hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people dying from opiate addiction every year. Textiles. I mean, everything that he did in the book that he talked about, these are all problems that we have now. Pollution, plastics. I mean, everything he touched on. And it just shows you people aren't in it for what's best for society. They're in it for the dollar.
And interestingly, Senator McConnell in Kentucky, he got behind hemp because of the economic impact in Kentucky. It was business in Kentucky and jobs, and it shows that hemp is and cannabis in general has that nonpartisan. One thing that the idea of freedom has somehow become more associated with one party than the other. And we certainly associate freedom and cannabis legalization. So that was one of the reasons that Headcount started the Cannabis Voter Project, because we are very strictly nonpartisan. And we wanted to do something that didn't have that, if we did the Climate Voter Project, there's a clear partisan tinge to it that just wouldn't be right for us. Whereas the Cannabis Voter Project, there were so many examples of cannabis crossing party lines and commonality, and whether it's about freedom and keeping government out of your hair, or about business and all these reasons that it is not as simply red and blue as so many other things unfortunately are right now.
Jen, how do you market to the cannabis community?
What I love about the cannabis community is that a lot of the cannabis community is an active community, right? To even exist. I mean, I remind people that every day that if you're getting up and you are working within the cannabis community, you're doing that in resistance to the federal government. You're engaged. You're showing up knowing every single day that could be a day that a federal agency walks in and raids you or changes your life or shuts down your bank account. You're taking risks every single day by doing the work that you're doing, however you're participating in cannabis. And that's really by saying, if you want that to change, this is how. You can't just complain about it. You got to show up.
So do you do it through, are you doing it as Instagram campaigns? Or
we're going out. We've gone out through Instagram. CannaCraft has 7 brands, and we're using all of our brand channels, trying to reach all of our consumers across all of those brands. We've reached out to all of our accounts across the state of California and in Colorado as well. Just, really, again, heavily encouraging them to then reach out to their consumers and use their social channels and their newsletters. Their loyalty programs have been used. We've sent out peer-to-peer texting information to everybody as well. Anything in every way and whatever touch point we can find to get people involved. This was the type of thing where CannaCraft knew we wanted to come in and lead in this space, but that we wouldn't accomplish without cohorts. Anybody that wants to get on the Cannabis Voter Project bandwagon and help us out, we want you here.
So let's list the kind of things that we're looking for this election. We want legalization, correct? We want interstate commerce, right? Where your brand does not have to be dedicated state by state. We want all our prisoners released that are in jail for cannabis crimes. We want banking regulations. How's that going?
Banking regulations have been fascinating. So, one of my actual first jobs, when I moved over from the music industry into the cannabis space, was actually counting cash, because of course that was something from working in the music industry that you knew how to run petty cash and you knew how to handle 15 runners and $25,000 of cash in a day. And so, doing that at one point, I made the state's first excise tax payment, like actually bringing that money and working with the agency to recount that cash. And we've lobbied really, really, really hard for banking, because it's just plain dangerous. Having this cash around is putting people's lives at risk. It's unnecessary, and it's clogging it up. So banking is a really important piece of it, and we're advocating for it. There's been rumors about California starting their own bank, for cannabis, but it hasn't happened yet. We'll see if that materializes. But the ability to bank is going to be huge. And interstate commerce, again, is going to be huge. What do we want the cannabis industry, when we really become an industry, to look like? Who do we want those players to be? And if we wait on interstate commerce for only the larger corporations to be able to come in and do that, because the costs and the metrics for a smaller company to rebuild over and over and over again, state by state, it's just not cost effective. And so that's a real issue there. So it's going to be really important. And the West Coast is looking at it.
It has been really interesting because it's allowed the mom and pops in state to be able to pop up and have a business, because if we would have legalized it across the country initially, it would have knocked out all these little CBD businesses, all these little cannabis bakers and everything like that. And now it's the ability for each state to build all these little like craft beer, I guess is the best analogy I can have, right? Where you have it's a craft. We have craft involved instead of corporate. But once the interstate goes away, a lot of those mom and pops, what do you think? They get sucked up into the conglomerates?
I mean, that's the fear, right? Or that a lot of, quite honestly, who we think of as the like authentic OG coming from that real place of, we were doing this when it wasn't legal, right? We were doing this just because we believed it was right. One of the co-founder of CannaCraft spent 6.5 years in federal prison for growing cannabis. And he came back out and he got back to work because he believed it was right. Not because he wanted to be a criminal, not because he wanted to be defying the law or causing a problem, but because he believed in people's right to this access to this medicine. And we want people like that to be fundamentally at the basis of an emerging cannabis industry. Not just, a pharmaceutical company coming in. Again, we don't want the people that got us all addicted to opiates to be coming in and then running the space.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, cannabis, when you get into the connoisseur levels of understanding the flavors and opening up a jar and being able to tell the strain and things like that, there's a high level of demand there for that, what you like and what you want. And I think when you get into the bigger businesses, is it harder to keep that quality in the scale?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, I can't really speak to what anybody else but we are doing. We take both the cannabis that we grow and the cannabis that we procure very, very carefully. But it's a very detailed process there. And yeah, you definitely need to look at who's growing your weed, in the same way of who's growing your fruits and vegetables and what's the process there. And, one of the things that's really interesting about cannabis now is that we're regulated in terms of organic and health, to parts per billion is what we're testing for in terms of pesticides. So the wine industry here, I'm in Sonoma County, they're testing to parts per million.
Wow.
So when we create an edible, for instance, we realized for a long time we have these like wonderful chocolate covered strawberries, and they kept coming back with the pesticides. Like we couldn't figure out what was wrong. And then we realized we needed to test the strawberry itself. It had nothing to do with the cannabis. The cannabis is clean, and America's strawberries are dirty. And we had to import strawberries from Italy, who have more stringent standards, in order to be able to pass the pesticides test and be able to put it on market. It's, again, it's a really interesting thing when you get down into the minutia of it, of what it takes to make this work under this particular level of regulation. Some good, some bad.
Incredible. Andy, what other groups? You got music lovers, you got cannabis lovers. I mean, what else?
We have a Vote with Pride. We did a Vote with Pride page that we launched for Pride Month. Somebody on our team had the idea, Ace Diabro, and we ended up getting a lot of partners involved. GLAD, which is being an anti-defamation organization. And then recently Grindr came on as a partner. And during National Voter Registration Day, an app for Grindr, which is a gay dating app. So our Vote with Pride page has a lot of information about, there are certain voting issues that affect particularly the transgender community in terms of how you have to fill out your voter registration and things like that. So we had information about that, and then just kind of organized, worked with a lot of organizations that serve the gay community, and we served up voter registration and voting information. So that's another, call it a vertical.
I love it. And you've been working with influencers. You're doing a thing with David Dobrovic, who is the guys, my kids love this kid. He's on, was it TikTok? And right, is that it?
Yeah. And I can't talk about what we're doing with David Dobrik.
That's fine.
Coming up, I can talk about what we did with him. It's amazing. Influencers are incredible. David Dobrik did a little video and registered 4,000 people in a couple days. And of all the things we've done this year, nothing has popped like David Dobrik. And there's a couple other influencers, a guy named Jack Douglas, Vsauce is another. And I got to admit, this isn't my world. I don't know this world.
But it is now, and you're learning it because it's effective, right?
Extremely effective. And we've seen that a few times with Headcount, where we've done stuff in the YouTube space, YouTube channels, and we just see stuff pops like nothing else we do. And I wish I could say that musicians are the number one like drivers, but we've actually found comedy is really strong too. And comedic musicians are the best. In our National Voter Registration Day campaign, the top two performers were Lil Dicky and Weird Al Yankovic. And that's out of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of musicians, including all the bands that you know and go to. And but Fish was our one of our best promos this year. We did something called Check My Status, and we had 25,000 Fish fans check their status, 1,500 of whom weren't registered and then went on to register. And that was extremely effective. So we're really happy that a Fish campaign did well. Our Dave Matthews stuff is doing well. Our Dead stuff always does well. But David Dobrik and Jack Douglas, not names that I personally was familiar with, those guys are like setting the pace. So, you got to go where the people are and go where, especially
and also go where the youth is and what the youth's paying attention to, because that's the most important vote there is, right? How is the registration with the youth vote? Have you seen an increase in that age group especially, or?
Very much so. And there's great data out there. Like in more than half the states, there are more young voters registered now, and this is as of August actually, than there were in November 2016. So in August, in half the states, we were already caught up to 2016. And that's despite DMVs being closed, which is a real problem for voter registration. So all the indications that we can see are young voters are coming in really strong. And the other great indication was the 2018 election had a huge increase in turnout by young voters. And I really credit the Parkland students for that. I think they created a real movement among first-time voters to get out there and engage. And that's the name of the game for Headcount. We want to help anybody vote and help anybody change their address or vote for the first time if they haven't ever before, no matter what their age is. But it's obviously young people who are coming of age, turning 18, are really where the sweet spot is. So being out on tour with Ariana Grande or Panic at the Disco or artists that really attract those young audiences, that's where we're always going to have the most impact.
I heard there were 4 million kids turning 18 before Election Day this year.
Yeah, that's right. And that's probably just this year. So you've also got another 4 million who turned 18 last year.
Right.
So, but what's a scary number is that usually there's about 750,000 Americans get naturalized every year, become citizens who are very eager to vote. Well, the naturalization ceremonies got put on hold because of COVID. And at most naturalization ceremonies, there is somebody there to help people register to vote. It's the law, actually, to make at least best efforts to have that happen. Well, the naturalization ceremonies were closed. So that went away. So one of the concerns is that this very enthusiastic voting bloc has been suppressed by COVID. And of course, there's political forces around that too. So you've got a lot of new voters coming in, but you've also got forces that are keeping voters from coming in, or just like college voter registration drives. I mean, a typical thing is on a college campus, freshmen are getting registered. There's a voting drive. There's an organization doing it. The school is doing it. Well, the kids are not on campus. And when they are on campus, it's not the normal setup. So there's a lot of things that just have not worked to our collective advantage during the pandemic. But we've tried to make up that gap with things like, Lenny Kravitz giving away a meet and greet and Jeff Kravitz checking his registration status and realizing that he'd been purged. So,
and I highly recommend. Like, I was shocked because I voted and I've been voting. I've been registered to vote in California since I got here. I was registered when I was 18. I remember going to court when I was in college once because I went in and couldn't vote. And like, you got to go down and see the judge to vote. And I'm like, really? And I was coming back from school and I was like, fuck it, I'm going down to see the judge. And I had to go sit in court. And the DA was trying to say why I shouldn't vote. And then the public defender was saying why I shouldn't. And the judge ruled that I could vote. And at this, I was 20 years old. And I was just like, I have to go down and go to court to do this. But you know what? It was important enough for me where I wanted to do it. And it was more proving to myself that I was right and having a judge say, yeah, this guy's should be able to vote. But on election day, going down to court, I mean, it was just like, I think back on that time and I was like, I was ballsy. I was always wanted to make my voice heard. And I can't imagine anybody else watching what's going on in our news and in our world and the cannabis lovers and the people that love music and everybody else and thinking, I want more of a life where there's no concerts. I want more of a life where I can't pass a joint to a friend. Forget it. This has to end now. We need to step up. Right, Jen?
Absolutely. Did you receive your yellow card? If you're in California, you should have received a yellow card that's telling you that you are registered to vote. So if you haven't gotten that piece of mail yet, check your voter registration. If you haven't received your election guide yet, which has arrived in the mail and has been mailed, it means that they don't have you. So check your voter registration, right? And then take this guide and get on your Zoom with your friends and light a joint and figure out how you're going to vote.
Right.
Yeah,
and
that's the most important thing that you can do, right? Which is also something that CannaCraft is going to try and be doing, like, with our employees. And we're going to see about hosting some larger Zooms as well. We're calling it pot plan and pot plan poll, right? Get there, smoke a joint, get into your guide, see what's going on.
Where do people follow along to learn about this stuff?
You can go to CannaCraft.com or any of our brand channels, and there's definitely stuff. Pretty much, there's going to be 3 or 4 posts. We're going to bury you in them, up to this election. We're also working on actually releasing a limited edition through Farmer and Felon. Our flower brand, we're going to do something called Unlocked, and we're going to do that as an unlock the vote, and again, that's just going to have cannabisvoter.info on there and encourage people to check that out as well. And, this year in California, a lot of people say we've legalized already, but there's, Prop 17 is about restoring voter rights to anybody who's been in prison the moment their term is up, which is not currently how it's done. So again, when we're talking about some of those inequities that we really need to fix, there's a moment there. So looking at what's down ticket is also really important. Who your mayor is elects who your sheriff is often voted in or is appointed by your local government. So if you are interested in what's going on with defund the police or, in looking at those brutality issues or just who's going to answer that call, if you call 911 and what could potentially happen, you have to participate on every level.
Yeah, well, the information is all out there. My wife said she went on the League of Women Voters the other day, which is an organization that's over 100 years old, I believe. And she said they had all the information on all the different, what do they call them? Number 22. Oh, the props. All the propositions. Sorry.
Yeah.
But yes, she said she was able to go on there and get great information. I know that Ballotpedia is great for smaller places where you don't understand your city government as much and you might be not understand how to vote there. And also I know Headcount's an amazing resource for a lot of this information too. Anywhere else, Andy, that people should really check for?
About Utopia is a really good one. Ballot Ready, which is on our website, is kind of a leading source for checking your ballot. And, and also like just Googling candidates and things like that, you can find a lot of information. It's one of the number one reasons people say they don't vote is because they don't know enough about the candidates. And I think it's really legit. Like we've all had that experience, like for a primary, you go in and you're like, judge this, judge that. Like, how do I possibly know? And I think that's something that technology can solve eventually. Like, I think there should be like a Yelp for elected officials. And you can usually, in most states, you can bring your phone into the voting booth, by the way. So you can actually do research. There's no time limit. So you can look up names and things like that. And it's one of those things that just in modern technology, it shouldn't be as hard as it is to find out about these candidates and about ballot initiatives.
And what's the real obstacle with voting by phone and using an app? I can transfer $10,000 on my bank account if I had $10,000. I could transfer it with a fingerprint.
Yeah.
And I can't vote.
You know, I went to I got brought into a thing at the Ford Foundation years ago with the head of a lot of voting groups, and they presented some information to basically tell us don't support online voting. And here's why. And they basically said that it's not hack proof. And I sat there and it was like the whole room of people like nodding their heads. And I'm thinking like, the problem isn't online voting. The problem is the systems. If we can keep our nuclear secrets on a computer somewhere and we can do all these things, we can actually fix this too. And we should set a standard for it being hack proof, but it's that our voting systems are antiquated and all these things. So I sat there and I made a choice. It was a hard choice. I said, Andy, shut your mouth. You don't need to be the person who disagrees with everybody in the room. You're not going to convince everybody, oh, we were wrong. So I sat there for hours thinking, like, honestly, I was hearing the same arguments being made that are being made by the other side about like voter ID. You know, where they were arguing that something could go wrong and, you know, or about vote by mail, that like it could be, you know, fraud could happen. Well, has it? Now with online voting,
they do a hackathon with an election, and it took them 30 seconds to, or
it's a funny story that they invited hackers. They did a fake election, and they invited hackers to hack it, and the hackers got in right away. And the hackers were Michigan grads, so they made it play the Michigan fight song anytime somebody tried to vote, and that was their hack. The hackers have good sense of humor, so it's like, okay, well, we're not there yet. You know, the systems they had weren't good enough and should not be used. But I don't think that this should be a forever thing. I think we have to get to a point where people, you know, as you said, we do everything else on our phones.
It's mind-boggling to me what I could do on my phone. The medical information I can get, the banking information, all my security information is on the phone, you know, and here I can't vote. Jen, how's the cannabis business?
I mean, it's an adventure every day. You know, somebody calls, what are you doing today? So I'm riding the wave, right? I mean, you can't catch a break. I mean, especially here in California, right? So vape craze, wildfires for the last 3 years.
Yeah, and I heard they're coming very close to millions of dollars worth of cannabis.
Millions of dollars of cannabis.
Now that's a real that's very serious now.
It's terrifying, you know, and B, you know, one of the things, again, that they allow the wine and people from the wine industry to go in and tend their crops still. So even if you're in an evacuation zone, if you're a vineyard, with permission, you can go in and say, be watering your grapes. But if you're a cannabis farm, obviously, if you're an illegal farm, you're not asking. And if you're a licensed farm, though, they weren't giving that same privilege to people. So once again, it was that a local sheriff who gets voted in saying no. Who's your sheriff, right? This is how are they going to treat people in an emergency? How are they going to treat the cannabis industry when we're literally facing wildfires and what they're doing to save that crop, again, which is people's medicine. And but that being said, you know, being declared essential, I mean, that was a terrifying moment for me. I'm a cannabis patient, right? So even having the access that I have and working for a cannabis manufacturer, I had a moment of panic going into COVID. You know, I had to admit it, like, didn't matter. You know, it was just the idea of it being shut down was absolutely terrifying. And to be able to, you know, stay open and make medicine available for people during this time, I think is hugely important. You know, there needs to be an alternative for the anxiety and the sleep issues that people are facing right now.
Well,
so we're doing our best to be able to show up for them.
You're doing God's work. Keep it up. Jen, thank you so much. The Cannabis Voter Project also has a Instagram and a Twitter, and you can go on there and get more information, correct?
Yep, cannabis_voter.
Okay, great. Andy, Jen, thank you guys. I appreciate it. It's an important election, and I really think we got some good information out to the people today. So thank you both.
Thanks.
Appreciate you, my man.
All right. Take care. Bye. There you go, folks. Helping you figure it out. giving you the information you needed, and trying to explain what the hell's going on in our country right now. I want to thank Andy and Jen for coming on today. Peace, love, and happiness, everybody out there. Oh, wait, you know what I got? Hold on. Oh, where is it? I can't find it. I had one of my candy bars here I was going to show you. If you want the candy bar, hit me up. But, you know, Asher's Chocolate has it. 420 Live is your code. Use the code. Spend $75. Get the most delicious chocolate bar. My kids opened it up last night. They finished the whole thing in one sitting. I did help. Peace, love, happiness, everybody out there. There's the hug. A big day glow weekend for everybody. Happy Friday. Have a good weekend. We'll see you back.